They called him the man who could buy anything. Julian Blackwell, a self-made tycoon whose empire stretched across upscale real estate, booming fintech ventures, global investments, and exclusive members-only lounges. He never imagined the pristine public image he so carefully crafted would implode so dramatically. Surrounded by glinting champagne flutes and the melodic laughter of socialites, Julian reveled in luxury with his dazzling mistress, Camille Rhodes, completely unaware of the reckoning on its way. His pregnant wife, Victoria, had finally uncovered the truth, and in one thunderous, devastating moment, the glamorous life he built began to shatter, legal documents gripped tightly in her hands. Victoria arrived at the grand affair, her presence setting the stage for a spectacular downfall. It was a cool spring evening when Julian Blackwell's yacht, the Obsidian Belle, cruised serenely through the still waters off the coast of Los Angeles. The decks sparkled beneath cascading fairy lights under a star-speckled sky. The city's most powerful elite had gathered to celebrate yet another of Julian's jaw-dropping business victories. Julian had just closed a massive deal with a major Asian conglomerate, expanding his footprint into luxury resorts in Tokyo, Seoul, and Kyoto. Clad in a flawlessly tailored cream linen suit, Julian radiated charisma as he greeted his exclusive guests. His dark hair was slicked back, his smile wide and victorious. A live jazz trio played softly near the front of the boat, while waitstaff weaved between guests with glasses of vintage champagne and artisan hors d'oeuvres. Laughter erupted in refined bursts as industry moguls traded gossip, eyed each other's designer ensembles, and vied for a sliver of Julian's attention. At the heart of it all, her arm entwined possessively with Julian's, stood Camille Rhodes. She was a captivating brunette in her late 20s, with a body that drew stares without effort. She wore a midnight navy gown that flowed like ink, the plunging neckline framed by a pair of diamond earrings Julian had gifted her earlier that afternoon. Camille had grown up surrounded by luxury. Her father had once been a prominent art investor in San Francisco, but after a string of failed ventures, her family's fortune had evaporated. For Camille, Julian was her ticket back to the circles she'd been shut out of. She thrived as the party surged around them. Swirling her champagne flute, Camille leaned in to whisper into Julian's ear, "You're the biggest story in town tonight." He grinned, sweeping his gaze across the deck. "Of course I am. I worked hard for this," Camille said with a lazy, confident smile. "I'll make sure no one forgets it." They made a striking pair, except for one glaring truth that everyone knew but no one dared to speak aloud. Julian Blackwell was a married man, and the woman clinging to his side wasn't his wife, Victoria. While whispers of an impending divorce floated through the air, nothing had been publicly confirmed. Victoria was nowhere to be seen on the yacht that night, and in the veiled world of LA's upper crust, discretion was everything. Gossip was gold, and maintaining appearances was an art form. As the music shifted from smooth jazz to sultry R&B, Camille pulled Julian toward the dance floor. They moved in sync beneath the cascading lights, her slender arms draped around his neck, his hands resting gently on her waist. She gazed up at him as if he were the only man alive, but beneath her gaze were silent strategies and quiet ambition. Camille was determined to solidify her place beside this powerful man. She understood the complexities of Julian's life, and if anyone could help him maneuver through a brewing scandal, it was a woman raised among social predators who had learned how to thrive. Julian's phone buzzed in his pocket. Instinctively, he glanced at the screen. One message lit up. "We need to talk. Stop ignoring me." It was from Victoria. For a moment, a faint tightness gripped his chest. Julian's eyes lingered on the screen longer than necessary. He pictured Victoria alone, likely pacing the penthouse, hand resting on her stomach. That image, her vulnerability, her disappointment, flickered like a shadow he couldn't quite shake. But then, just as quickly, he brushed it away, drowning the discomfort in the heady rush of attention and power surrounding him. A brief flicker of guilt passed through him, but just barely. Their marriage had become a war zone of whispered arguments and cold stares over the past several months. Yes, Victoria was pregnant, but Julian had convinced himself that even a child couldn't anchor him to a marriage that had already drowned in resentment. He silenced his phone and slipped it back into his jacket. Tonight was about celebration. He'd deal with Victoria later. A photographer approached, the flash of the camera slicing through the night as it captured Julian and Camille in a passionate pose. The light illuminated Camille's victorious smile. In that moment, she looked every bit the queen of his empire. Julian soaked in the attention, intoxicated by the spotlight, convinced of his own invincibility. His success, his fortune, his reputation, everything felt unstoppable. The celebration surged on until well past midnight, growing more indulgent by the hour as guests helped themselves to premium liquor and danced away their inhibitions. The band eventually gave way to a DJ whose high-energy beats sent guests shedding shoes and sliding across the yacht's glossy teak floor. Julian remained the focal point of every conversation, the gravitational pull of the evening. He was unstoppable. Or so he believed. Far from the shimmering lights of the yacht, Victoria Blackwell sat alone in the bedroom of their Los Angeles penthouse. She stared at her phone. The latest photos from the yacht party were already circulating across social media. One particularly damning shot showed Camille and Julian practically wrapped around each other. Victoria's hand moved to her gently rounded belly. She was just 4 months pregnant. The baby had been meant to signal a new beginning, a fresh chapter for them to grow as a family. But as her screen lit up with images of her husband's face splashed across every social post, the truth became impossible to ignore. Julian was charting a different course, one she could no longer follow in silence. Her jaw tightened as she picked up an envelope containing legal documents. She had hoped never to use them. Her eyes welled with tears, but she steadied herself. Victoria had always been a woman of quiet dignity, raised to never create a scene, but enough was enough. A storm churned quietly inside her, rage and grief, love and disbelief colliding in a whirlwind she could barely contain. How could the man who once whispered dreams of fatherhood now publicly humiliate her? How had their vows unraveled into nothing more than staged smiles and whispered excuses? Tonight marked the breaking point. The final betrayal had just been broadcast to the world. Tomorrow, when the celebration spilled into brunch or the next high society event, Julian would discover he wasn't untouchable. He wasn't immune to consequences, because Victoria Blackwell, née Victoria Langford, was ready to shatter his illusion of control. Victoria had been born into old wealth, raised in an elegant Charleston estate steeped in tradition. Her upbringing was refined, shaped by parents who prized intellect, grace, and restraint. When she first met Julian at a Wharton Business School fundraiser, sparks flew instantly. She was captivated by his drive, by the restless energy that clung to him like a second skin. Julian, in turn, was taken by her wit, her strength, and yes, the prestigious Langford name, which assured no one could ever accuse him of social climbing. Their romance was swift but genuine. Within a year, they were married in a lavish ceremony on the Langford grounds. At the time, Julian was an ambitious entrepreneur on the rise, and Victoria stood steadfast beside him. For several years, their marriage flourished beneath the glow of shared success. They were a force in their social circles. He thrived in high-stakes business, and she championed philanthropic causes, hosting glamorous fundraisers that attracted celebrities, politicians, and finance giants. Everything changed when Victoria found out she was pregnant. At first, Julian appeared thrilled. He cradled her and whispered in her ear that she would be the most stunning mother in the world. They had planned to convert one of the penthouse's spare rooms into a nursery. Victoria pictured a future filled with baby giggles, holiday dinners, and maybe even fewer late nights at the office for Julian. But as her belly grew, so did the emotional distance between them. Julian started taking on more international projects, citing expansion efforts that required travel to Hong Kong and Singapore. With time, photos from those trips began to surface. Camille appeared in far too many of them, sometimes blurred in the background, other times standing just behind Julian in a crowd of colleagues. At first, Victoria tried to believe it was coincidence, but that illusion shattered when a social media post captured Julian and Camille together at a private art showing in Hong Kong, an event Victoria hadn't even known he attended. That's when suspicion turned into certainty. Over the next several weeks, Victoria quietly gathered evidence: hotel receipts that didn't match his itinerary, calls that went unanswered, late-night texts, and Camille's ever-present shadow on every important trip. Slowly, heartbreak evolved into anger, and anger sharpened into purpose. When Victoria confronted Julian about Camille, he sidestepped the truth with slippery excuses and deflections. "You're being paranoid," he'd say, or "she's an investor, a friend." But the most brutal line, the one that pierced her the core, "I'm not going to risk a billion-dollar deal because of your insecurity." The final blow came unexpectedly, when Victoria found a black lace dress in the trunk of Julian's sports car. It was a size too small for her. Julian's only defense? "It's a gift for you." But Victoria recognized the scent of Camille's perfume on it instantly. That's when the last thread snapped. This wasn't something that could be fixed over a gentle dinner conversation. There would be no heartfelt apology, no meaningful gesture to win her back. The man she had married had transformed into a person ruled by pride, greed, and a need for constant adoration. So Victoria turned her pain into power. She hired one of the most respected divorce attorneys in Los Angeles, a woman named Monica Reyes, feared in high society legal circles for her ability to unearth every hidden asset and dismantle even the most fortified fortunes. Monica began drafting documents that would not only initiate divorce proceedings, but also guarantee Victoria's financial future, and more importantly, her unborn child's. That night, after seeing Julian dance with Camille on that damned yacht, Victoria's tears vanished. In their place came a quiet, fierce resolve. The next time she saw Julian, she wouldn't whisper or plead. She would hand him those papers herself and watch as the world he thought was untouchable unraveled at his feet. She would no longer play the role of the silent, polished wife. And to understand how Camille Rhodes ended up entangled in Julian Blackwell's marriage, you had to look further back into her own past. Raised in a privileged American household, Camille spent her childhood in opulent surroundings, with priceless art hanging on every wall. Her father, Franklin Rhodes, was known in elite circles for his sharp eye for undiscovered talent and his extensive web of collectors. He embodied the ideal of cultured sophistication. But Franklin also had a penchant for high-stakes financial risk, and one ill-timed property investment in South America wiped out their entire fortune. At 23, Camille found herself without the safety net she had always taken for granted. Gone were the front-row seats at New York Fashion Week, replaced by economy flights and a cramped flat in a dreary Brooklyn walk-up. She had to fend for herself, juggling sporadic modeling gigs and shifts as a gallery hostess. Still, Camille never lost her craving for luxury. She kept herself in the orbit of the wealthy and well-connected, determined to find a new path back to the lifestyle she believed she deserved. That path revealed itself when she met Julian Blackwell at a private auction in London. Their conversation started over a striking painting by a rising Latin American artist. Camille, trained from childhood to spot forgeries, recognized it as a replica. Julian was seconds away from bidding a ridiculous amount on the piece when Camille leaned in with a sly smile and a quiet warning. Her tip saved him $500,000. Intrigued, Julian invited her to dinner. They spoke of art, business, and their contrasting upbringings. He was drawn to her wit and poise. She was mesmerized by his ambition and the fire in his eyes. Over the following year, Camille worked her way deeper into Julian's life. She offered him insider tips on upcoming art trends, introduced him to London's most exclusive circles, and connected him to people he might have spent years trying to impress. Julian, smitten with Camille's intelligence and allure, began taking her on more business trips. But boundaries faded quickly. Before long, they were sharing hotel rooms and secret kisses in between meetings. Rumors didn't take long to follow, but Camille wasn't satisfied with being just another affair. She wanted more. Stability, prestige, a name on the door. She wanted to be Mrs. Julian Blackwell. And the only thing standing in her way was Victoria. Victoria had the title, the respect, the legitimacy, and now an unborn child. To Camille, that baby was a complication she hadn't anticipated, and one she wasn't sure how to outmaneuver. Yet Camille saw it as an opportunity too. If Julian grew tired of Victoria's emotional needs, Camille would be ready to step in, with unwavering admiration and zero demands. She played the role of the perfect companion. She never questioned his late-night calls, never mentioned the long absences for international travel, and never asked for more than he was willing to give. At least, not yet. But Camille had a long game in mind. Her father had drilled one lesson into her from a young age. Understand the financial battlefield before making your move. Camille spent hours poring over business publications and financial news about Blackwell Global Holdings. She analyzed real estate filings, skimmed gossip blogs for wealth estimates, and mapped out the social structure of LA's elite. What she uncovered thrilled her. Julian's actual net worth far exceeded what the press reported. But while Camille studied and planned, Julian, despite the glow of success, began to experience moments of unexpected stillness. He would find himself staring out over the city skyline from his penthouse balcony, glass of scotch in hand, feeling a weight he couldn't name. Surrounded by luxury, with Camille draped across the leather sofa laughing at some investor's joke, Julian sometimes felt like a man cast in the lead role of a play he didn't audition for. In quieter moments, he couldn't ignore the faint echo of guilt. Not just toward Victoria, but toward the version of himself he used to be. Hungry, ethical, focused. The Julian who believed success had to mean something. He hadn't shared these thoughts with anyone, not even Camille. They surfaced in brief flickers, quickly buried beneath champagne toasts and business headlines. But they were there, and each time they returned, they lingered a little longer. If Victoria moved forward with a divorce, especially without a solid prenuptial agreement, it could shake the entire Blackwell empire. Camille knew that if scandal broke, she had to be positioned to comfort Julian, guide him into his next chapter, and be there when the dust settled. Not just by his side, but as Mrs. Blackwell, with access to the Blackwell fortune. Behind her teasing glances and sweet nothings, Camille was calculating every move. She whispered affirmations into Julian's ear, praising his brilliance and feeding his ego. She dazzled investors at high-end dinners with just the right amount of charm. With every business milestone, she embedded herself deeper into Julian's world, and every so often she'd make a casual remark about disappearing, just enough to trigger his fear of losing her. Julian, increasingly hooked on her admiration, only clung tighter. That night on the yacht, Camille's heart raced with anticipation. She felt certain the Blackwell marriage was in its final hours. She could almost taste the victory. But she had no idea that Victoria was already making her move, a move that would demolish the fantasy Camille had so meticulously built. Camille's ambitions were vast, but she was playing a dangerous game. Julian's ethics were murky at best, and Victoria's strength ran deeper than Camille had ever imagined. One of the lesser-known aspects of the Blackwell-Langford marriage was the profound influence of Victoria's father, Grant Langford. A highly respected figure in East Coast circles, Grant was a Harvard-trained attorney and philanthropist who had spent decades building a formidable network of powerful allies. His talent for sniffing out dishonesty was unmatched, honed through years of defending family estates and representing corporate empires in high-stakes litigation. Victoria was his only child. Grant raised her with a careful balance of empathy and discipline, teaching her to be both kind and unyielding when necessary. When she married Julian, Grant welcomed him with open arms, even offering occasional business mentorship. Early on, Julian flourished under Grant's guidance, absorbing financial strategies that fueled his real estate expansion. But as Julian's ego swelled, he began to reject what he saw as meddling from his father-in-law. Soon, Grant noticed troubling signs: mood swings, flashes of arrogance, and a growing tendency to conceal key financial moves. When Grant tried to broach the issue, Julian dismissed him with courteous but firm resistance. Then everything shifted. During a private dinner at the Langford estate, Victoria broke down. Through tears, she confessed that she suspected Julian was cheating. Grant's instincts kicked into overdrive. While Victoria wrestled with heartbreak, her father quietly mobilized his connections. He launched an investigation with surgical precision, collecting evidence of Julian's indiscretions, photos, bank statements, and eyewitness accounts from colleagues who had seen him and Camille together at industry functions. Victoria's pregnancy only deepened Grant's commitment. He was resolute in his mission to protect his future grandchild from an increasingly reckless father who appeared to be chasing indulgence at the expense of family. Grant urged Victoria to explore her legal avenues, directing her toward Monica Reyes, the formidable divorce attorney known for dismantling even the most airtight defenses. Meanwhile, Julian grew more distant and erratic, pouring his energy into high-profile ventures and extravagant parties. He stopped attending family events, offering weak excuses, emergency board meetings, urgent investor calls. Grant wasn't fooled. When he made one final effort to speak with Julian, confronting him at a charity gala, Julian's response dripped with arrogance. "I'm a busy man, Grant," he said coldly. "Victoria needs to understand that my career comes first." That was the moment Grant decided he was done playing nice. He gave Victoria not only his blessing, but access to the legal and financial arsenal she would need to fight back. In the weeks leading up to that now infamous yacht party, Victoria returned briefly to her family's estate in Charleston. She needed distance from the media noise of Los Angeles. Julian, meanwhile, was spinning. Beneath his confident exterior, he felt the first tremors of something he couldn't name. Fatigue, perhaps, or unease. The very empire he had built now demanded more of him than he could replenish. Nights blurred into mornings, and despite the endless toasts and celebrations, he couldn't shake the nagging sense that something was slipping from his grasp. He began waking in cold sweats, haunted by dreams he couldn't remember, only the feeling of falling, always falling. There were moments, brief and infrequent, when he caught his reflection and didn't recognize the man staring back. A man who had traded intimacy for image and peace for performance. But these thoughts were dangerous distractions, and so he shoved them aside, burying them under meetings, headlines, and Camille's rehearsed adoration. Sitting in her childhood bedroom, she gazed out over the perfectly trimmed hedges where she once played as a little girl. A quiet wave of grief washed over her. She had once admired Julian with her whole heart. She had believed in his vision, supported his career, even set aside her own philanthropic work to help him shine. Now, with her hand resting gently on her growing stomach, she realized the best gift she could give her child was freedom from the toxic world Julian had created. Together, Victoria and Grant crafted a strategy. The divorce papers would be served in a manner Julian couldn't manipulate, public, final, and dramatic enough to strip him of the upper hand. It would be a moment of truth, and though Victoria dreaded the spectacle, she knew it had to be done. Then, the perfect opening presented itself. Julian's post-celebration brunch at a posh Beverly Hills restaurant, an event guaranteed to attract paparazzi and the city's elite. Victoria would arrive unannounced, documents in hand. The idea was simple. The wife he had cast aside would confront him in front of every person whose approval he craved. But fate had a twist waiting. That same morning, Camille staged a surprise press conference outside the venue, announcing a new philanthropic project she and Julian were launching together. It was a shameless PR stunt, designed to reframe their affair as something noble, a glossy partnership under the banner of social impact. A calculated move to elevate Camille's role in Julian's life. But if Julian expected the day to end with applause, he was about to be sorely disappointed, because Victoria, poised, silent, but unshakably firm, was ready to deliver a blow that would echo across LA's high society for months to come. The sun was blistering that Southern California morning as VIP guests and media crowded outside a sleek restaurant called La Maison Argent, a celebrity haven for the rich and famous. Julian pulled up in a gleaming black Rolls-Royce, Camille on his arm like a living accessory. She wore a tailored ivory dress with gold accents, her hair pulled into a polished chignon. Cameras snapped instantly, capturing every gleam, every angle. Julian flashed his signature smile, mentally rehearsing his speech. The event had been carefully choreographed to promote the charitable wing of Blackwell Global, but in reality, it was a thinly veiled attempt to legitimize Camille as his philanthropic partner. Inside, the setting was immaculate. Tables shimmered with white linen, towering floral displays added elegance, and a lavish buffet offered artisan pastries, fresh-cut fruit, and vintage champagne. At the center stood a sleek podium, ready for Julian's moment in the spotlight. Camille rested a manicured hand on Julian's shoulder, leaned in and murmured, "Don't forget to thank me, for the foundation and for everything else." Julian smirked. "I won't forget," he said. They moved gracefully through the crowd, exchanging cordial greetings with local officials, philanthropists, and longtime business allies. Guests marveled at how seamlessly Camille had positioned herself as Julian's public companion. The whispers started almost immediately. Where was Victoria? Some speculated the Blackwell marriage was already over. Others guessed Victoria was too humiliated to show her face. Right on cue, Julian stepped up to the podium, tapping the microphone with practiced ease. The chatter dissolved into silence. "Good morning, everyone," he began, radiating confidence. "Thank you for joining us on this incredible day. I'm proud to announce the launch of the Blackwell Rhodes Foundation, a global initiative to support arts education in underserved communities." He paused, turning slightly. "And I want to extend special thanks to Miss Camille Rhodes for her crucial role in shaping this mission." Applause spread politely through the crowd. Camille offered a modest smile, eyes trained on Julian. She could practically feel the spotlight locking her in place, her name now intertwined with his in a public, undeniable way. This was the validation she had been chasing. Then, just as Julian prepared to continue, the restaurant's front doors swung open. A collective hush swept the space. Victoria Blackwell stood in the entrance, her chin lifted, posture unwavering, regal in the way only a Langford woman could be. She wore a sleek, understated black dress that subtly revealed the curve of her pregnant stomach. Each step she took into the spotlight was measured and deliberate, but beneath her composed exterior, her heart pounded like a drum. She felt every eye on her, every breath of judgment and curiosity, yet she clung to the dignity that had been instilled in her since childhood. The air tightened. Cameras instantly shifted, lenses refocusing in her direction. Julian froze, eyes widening. Camille's smile vanished, replaced by the unmistakable glint of panic. The reporters recognized the unfolding drama and moved fast, snapping rapid shots of Victoria. She walked forward slowly, deliberately, her gaze locked on Julian. Camille might as well have been invisible. There was no room for doubt or hesitation. She wasn't just confronting a husband's betrayal. She was reclaiming her place, her story, and her voice. In that suspended moment, the silence became deafening. It was the first time Victoria had made a public appearance with her pregnancy visible, and the first time she and Julian had stood together in the same room in months. Flanking Victoria was Monica Reyes, her attorney. Monica's face was sharp with focus, holding a thick envelope in her grasp. Then the silence broke. There were audible gasps. Murmurs swept the room. "Oh my God," echoed faintly through the crowd, as Victoria stepped forward, taking the envelope from Monica. Without removing her eyes from Julian, she approached the podium. "Julian Blackwell," she said, her voice clear and steady, "you've been served." Camille stood frozen, barely breathing, while Julian's expression shifted from stunned disbelief to tightly restrained rage. Cameras clicked furiously, capturing every second of the collision unfolding before them. It was a public relations catastrophe, the complete opposite of the polished philanthropic image Julian had so carefully curated. Julian reached for the envelope, but Victoria held it firmly for a beat longer before releasing it. "I suggest you read it," she said quietly. Then she turned and walked away, her stride purposeful, Monica close at her heels. Reporters erupted, shouting questions and demands, but Victoria didn't flinch. Outside, she moved past the paparazzi and stepped into a waiting black SUV. Her heart pounded, but a powerful sense of relief surged through her. Inside La Maison Argent, chaos exploded. Julian ripped open the envelope, his eyes darting across the divorce summons. Allegations of infidelity and marital misconduct laid bare on paper. Camille reached out to touch his arm, but he knocked her hand away without hesitation. The illusion of control he had basked in just moments ago evaporated. What remained was the crushing realization that his pregnant wife had turned the narrative against him, in the most humiliating and irreversible way possible. The shockwaves of Victoria's dramatic move echoed across LA's elite and beyond. By that night, social media was ablaze with clips of the moment she served him. Every angle, every expression was scrutinized. Blogs and gossip sites dissected the footage. Victoria's grace under pressure, Julian's crumbling facade. Hashtags like Blackwell divorce and scandal at Maison Argent trended for days, completely eclipsing the foundation launch Julian had so desperately tried to promote. For Julian, the immediate fallout was brutal. His phone blew up with calls from rattled investors, furious board members, and even a few high-profile partners reconsidering their ties to a man now mired in public disgrace. The once untouchable Julian Blackwell suddenly looked vulnerable. His image, long built on success and sophistication, was unraveling. In a frantic bid to control the narrative, Julian called an emergency meeting with his PR team at the Blackwell Global headquarters. He sat stiffly at the head of a long mahogany table, Camille to his right and his PR strategist, Thomas Caldwell, to his left. Thomas, a crisis veteran known for his cool under fire, appeared unusually tense. "We need a statement," Thomas began, his glance flicking nervously toward Camille. "One that humanizes you, Julian. Something that clarifies your relationship with Miss Rhodes. Right now, the public is writing the story for us. We can't let that happen." Julian scowled, pressing his fingers into his temples. "This is all Victoria's doing. She ambushed me at my own event." Camille leaned in, her voice unsteady. "We could say that Victoria misunderstood our partnership," Camille suggested, her voice tentative. "That the foundation was always meant to include her. Maybe this was just one big miscommunication." Thomas shot her a skeptical look. "With all due respect, Miss Rhodes, the photos of you and Julian dancing on that yacht are already viral. They're fueling the narrative. No one's going to believe this was just a misunderstanding." Julian's frustration flared. "Don't tell me we can't spin this. We've spun worse." Thomas folded his hands on the table, keeping his tone measured. "It's different this time. Victoria's pregnant, and she's a deeply sympathetic figure. She comes from an influential family. Public sentiment is already tipping in her favor. And the way she served you, calculated, public, unflinching, it shows she's not afraid to strike where it hurts. That changes everything." Camille looked as if she had just swallowed something sour. She had misjudged Victoria, badly. Camille had assumed she was the classic society wife, too graceful, too restrained, too polished to stir drama. But now the mask was off, revealing a woman of quiet but formidable resolve. For the first time, Camille's ambition began to tremble, but she kept her expression neutral. Beneath the table, her fingers curled into a fist. This wasn't the path she'd envisioned, Julian unraveling under pressure, Thomas taking cautious steps around every word, and her own position suddenly feeling tenuous. She had played her role perfectly, or so she thought. Yet here she was, sidelined in a crisis that could erase everything she had schemed for. Julian slammed his fist on the table. "I need answers." Thomas exhaled. "Then here's one. Issue a public apology for the misunderstanding. Affirm your dedication to your unborn child, and propose an amicable separation. That might help recover some goodwill." Julian scoffed. "I'm not apologizing for living my life, and I'm not going to look weak." "That's your choice," Thomas replied, his tone calm. "But you should know, the more you deny accountability, the worse this could get. Victoria has the Langford family behind her. If they want to, they can expose every skeleton in your closet." The room fell silent. Camille toyed with the gold bracelet around her wrist, doubts swirling in her head. She had believed Julian would have a plan, a bulletproof way to stay in control. But now his bravado was cracking, and with it, her own confidence in the future they'd imagined together. It dawned on her that Julian wasn't the unshakable mastermind she once admired. He was scrambling, grasping at power in a narrative slipping through his fingers. And Camille, for all her charm and calculation, was suddenly nothing more than a wild card he couldn't afford. While Julian struggled to rally his PR machine, Victoria was quietly working with her legal team, methodically preparing for the next phase of the divorce. She had no intention of dragging the matter into a media circus, but she also refused to be intimidated. Monica Reyes had uncovered suspicious financial activity, offshore accounts Julian hadn't disclosed. Grant Langford stood ready to release a trove of incriminating documents should Julian attempt to force a one-sided settlement. The illusions Julian had built his empire on were beginning to collapse. Julian's business partners began to question his judgment. Major media outlets speculated whether his empire was teetering on the edge of collapse. And Camille, who had once felt so confident in her trajectory toward replacing Victoria, watched in quiet dread as the man she had built her future around faltered under mounting pressure. Worse still, Victoria wasn't finished. She held one final card, something that would recast the entire scandal in an even harsher light. And when she chose to play it, not even the full weight of Blackwell Global could contain the tsunami of public backlash that followed. The first tremor of Julian Blackwell's imminent unraveling came from an unlikely source. An investigative journalist named Rachel Lynn, working for a respected LA newspaper, had been tracking the story since the moment Victoria publicly served the divorce papers. Sensing there was more beneath the surface, Rachel began a deeper probe into the financial infrastructure of Julian's empire. Her instincts told her the pristine exterior masked deeper cracks. Initially, she uncovered minor discrepancies, unexplained shifts in property tax filings, rumors of quiet staff layoffs that never made press. But as she dug further, aided by anonymous sources close to the inner workings of Blackwell Global, she began tracing a network of suspicious shell companies connected to Julian. Money flowed in and out of these entities in patterns that hinted at tax evasion, or worse. Rachel approached Victoria's legal team. Though they declined official comment, Monica Reyes hinted, off the record, that Julian's financial dealings were under scrutiny. That evidence was being gathered to secure Victoria's full entitlements during the divorce proceedings. Smelling a major scoop, Rachel pressed forward. Her persistence eventually led her to a source inside one of Julian's offshore banks in the Cayman Islands. Protected by layers of secrecy, the whistleblower risked their career to leak internal documents. The revelations were explosive. For years, Julian had been quietly funneling profits from Blackwell Global into personal offshore accounts. The sums were immense. The intent? Unclear. Was it strategic asset protection? Tax evasion? Shielding funds from lawsuits? Either way, the optics were devastating. When Rachel Lynn's expose hit the press, it detonated across social media. Front-page headlines screamed, "Blackwell Empire built on deception," and secret offshore accounts exposed. The business world, already rattled by Julian's public scandal, moved swiftly to distance itself. His stock, once a Wall Street favorite, plummeted overnight, wiping out millions in value from Blackwell Global. Julian attempted to downplay the accusations, blaming clerical mistakes and misinterpretations. But the evidence was overwhelming. Federal agencies opened investigations. Financial regulators demanded audits. Legal analysts speculated that criminal charges were likely on the horizon. Caught in the chaos, Camille Rhodes put on a brave front. She issued a statement declaring her unwavering belief in Julian's innocence, insisting it was all a misunderstanding. But privately, the reality sank in. She wasn't married to Julian. Her name appeared on no legal documents, which meant if everything fell apart, she had no rightful claim to his wealth. And if the Blackwell Empire collapsed entirely, there might not be any wealth left to claim. Investors and board members of Blackwell Global met in emergency sessions, questioning whether Julian was still capable of leading the company. For the first time in his career, Julian faced the very real threat of being removed from the enterprise he had built. He found himself increasingly isolated. Only a shrinking circle of loyalists remained, and even they were beginning to waver. As legal pressure mounted, Julian tried to negotiate with Victoria. He offered her a sizable settlement, on the condition she sign a non-disclosure agreement and agree not to testify about his finances. Victoria refused. Through Monica, she made it clear. Her priority was the well-being of her unborn child and securing a fair outcome. She would not help Julian cover up his wrongdoing. With the walls closing in, Julian's confidence curdled into rage. He lashed out at his legal team, accusing them of incompetence. He turned on Camille, blaming her for escalating the scandal with her ill-conceived foundation launch. The tension exploded. Shouting matches replaced affection, and Camille, once adored, now became a convenient target for his frustration. Meanwhile, the public was hooked. Every sordid detail, from the affair to the offshore accounts, played out like a high-stakes drama. Talk shows debated whether Julian was a heartless villain or a misunderstood visionary. Social media took sides. Many hailed Victoria as a symbol of grace and courage. Others tore into Camille, branding her a manipulative interloper. Then came the final blow. The FBI officially announced a federal investigation into Blackwell Global for financial misconduct. Julian's phone vibrated constantly. Lawyers, reporters, and terrified colleagues flooded him with calls. He realized, too late, that the empire he had spent a lifetime constructing was collapsing beneath the weight of his own arrogance. And in the quiet serenity of her family's Charleston estate, Victoria watched the downfall from afar. Her heart was a mix of relief and sadness. She had never wished harm upon the father of her child. But she knew Julian had brought this upon himself. Now, her focus shifted to the future, to protecting her baby and embracing a life no longer chained to deception. In the weeks that followed, Julian Blackwell's world unraveled at dizzying speed. The FBI investigation intensified, and then Blackwell Global was raided by federal agents. At dawn, federal agents descended on the Los Angeles headquarters of Blackwell Global, armed with warrants for emails and digital files. They swept through the lobby, hauling out boxes of documents and computer hard drives, while bewildered executives tried, unsuccessfully, to intervene. News helicopters buzzed overhead, capturing the unfolding scene live for national broadcasts. Julian, once the picture of composure in designer suits, was photographed outside in a wrinkled dress shirt and unkempt hair, arguing with federal agents at the building's entrance. The image spread like wildfire, a striking portrait of a fallen mogul. Camille watched the footage from the comfort of her luxury high-rise condo, a property Julian had purchased for her months ago. She sat curled on a velvet sofa, her gaze fixed on the television as a news anchor recited a long list of charges: securities fraud, tax evasion, money laundering. There was even talk of possible jail time. Her phone lit up with messages: former friends, casual contacts, nosy strangers, some expressing hollow concern, others prying to see if she'd known about Julian's criminal behavior. A chill seeped into her bones. She thought briefly about calling Julian, but stopped. She had her own future to worry about. If Julian fell, what would happen to her lavish lifestyle? If he was indicted, could she be implicated, dragged into the legal firestorm as a co-conspirator or witness? Fear twisted with regret. Camille had staked everything on a man whose kingdom was turning to dust beneath him. Meanwhile, Victoria pressed ahead with the divorce. Her goal was unwavering: to ensure long-term security for her unborn child. With the full force of the Langford legal team behind her, negotiations intensified. They demanded a sizable share of Julian's remaining assets, plus ongoing child support and the establishment of a trust fund for the baby. Each new financial revelation strengthened Victoria's case. Her lawyers turned Julian's misdeeds into leverage, tightening the terms of the settlement. Through it all, Victoria remained composed. She gave no interviews. She posted nothing online. She declined every media request. The tabloids, hungry for drama, were left with silence. Her days became simpler, filled with prenatal appointments, decorating a serene nursery in a quiet wing of the Langford estate, and spending time with her father and close friends. The once glamorous life of galas and fundraisers was replaced by something far more personal: preparation for motherhood. Then came the date of the preliminary divorce hearing. The courthouse steps in downtown Los Angeles turned into a frenzy. Reporters crowded the sidewalks, cameras rolling, all jostling for a glimpse of Julian Blackwell and the woman who had brought his empire to its knees. They arrived in separate vehicles, each accompanied by their legal teams. Inside the courtroom, Victoria sat in quiet composure, dressed in a modest maternity gown. Across the aisle, Julian looked exhausted, his eyes ringed with dark circles. Camille was conspicuously absent. The hearing began with routine formalities. The petition was read, identities confirmed. Then, Monica Reyes stepped forward to outline Victoria's case, detailing Julian's repeated infidelities, his emotional abandonment of a pregnant wife, and the suspicious financial conduct that jeopardized the family's future. Julian's attorney tried to portray Victoria as vindictive, accusing her of orchestrating the public courtroom drama to sabotage Julian's public image. But the judge remained expressionless, clearly more concerned with the unborn child's welfare than with tabloid theatrics. When Julian was asked to speak, he hesitated. Gone was the confident, untouchable businessman. His voice cracked slightly. "I never meant to hurt Victoria," he murmured, glancing toward his soon-to-be ex-wife. "Things just got out of control." Victoria returned his gaze. Her expression was calm, tinged with sadness, but resolute. She didn't respond. Everything that needed saying had already been communicated through legal channels, and through the unwavering steel in her eyes. "You did this to yourself." Julian's hands fidgeted beneath the table. For the first time, he felt not just exposed, but stripped bare. No amount of charm, spin, or financial muscle could rescue him now. And as the silence lingered in the courtroom, shame coiled deep in his chest. He had thought he could outmaneuver consequences the way he had outmaneuvered rivals. But this wasn't business. This was his child's future, his legacy, crumbling in full view. The court scheduled a final hearing and ordered both parties to attend mandatory mediation. The judge also required Julian to deposit a substantial bond into an escrow account to guarantee financial support for the child. With the future of Blackwell Global uncertain, it was a small but meaningful win for Victoria, and a bitter blow for Julian, whose access to liquid assets was dwindling. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. "Victoria, any comment on Julian's alleged crimes? How do you feel about raising the baby on your own?" Victoria simply replied, "No comment," her voice poised but final before stepping into her waiting vehicle. Her silence said more than any soundbite ever could. She was done being part of the spectacle. Inside his own SUV, Julian stared at his reflection in the window. For the first time in years, he felt the crushing weight of consequence. His illusions of invincibility shattered. In mere weeks, he had lost the respect of his peers, faced the looming threat of criminal prosecution, and jeopardized his child's future. Was this the cost of hubris, of betrayal? Camille called that evening, but Julian let it ring. He couldn't bear her voice, or the inevitability of her goodbye. Gradually, Julian began to understand the truth. Nearly every relationship in his life had been transactional, fueled by status, utility, and image. Now stripped of power and prestige, he found himself questioning whether anyone had ever genuinely cared for him. And so began Julian Blackwell's final reckoning, a descent through relentless legal battles, public disgrace, and deep personal remorse. The man who once thought he could control everything with money now faced debts that demanded repayment in kind. The bill for his choices had come due, and it was merciless. 8 months later, the dust had mostly settled, though echoes of the scandal still hung in the air like a slow-moving storm. Julian now faced a slew of criminal charges related to financial misconduct. A trial loomed. With his resources dwindling, he was forced to liquidate assets to fund his legal defense. The first to go was his prized yacht, the Silver Dominion, followed by 2 penthouses and a fleet of luxury cars. His name still appeared in headlines, but only in connection with lawsuits and federal probes. Camille Rhodes, once at his side, quietly disappeared from Los Angeles. Rumor had it she negotiated a substantial payout before Julian's accounts were frozen. Then she vanished. Some said she resurfaced in Monaco. Others claimed she was seen in Mayfair. She never spoke publicly about the affair again. Tabloids speculated she was already searching for her next benefactor. Victoria Blackwell, on the other hand, embraced a quieter, more purposeful existence. The divorce had been finalized. The settlement secured long-term stability for her and the child, including trust funds, property, and ongoing support. The media storm had faded, replaced by fresher scandals. Victoria returned to her family's Charleston estate, seeking solace in the familiar. There, she gave birth to a healthy baby boy, Alexander Grant Blackwell, named in part for her father and partly to preserve the Blackwell legacy. Despite Julian's fall, she found new meaning by reconnecting with her philanthropic work. She launched the Bright Start Initiative, a grant program supporting single mothers who lacked financial and emotional resources. The name was a testament to her hopes for Alexander's future, a symbol of strength born from adversity. In the months following Alexander's birth, Victoria's name began appearing in a different kind of headline. Stories praised her poise and grace, holding her in sharp contrast to Julian's dramatic collapse. Interview requests flooded in. She accepted only a few, measured, purposeful appearances. In each, she spoke about motherhood, personal growth, and letting go of bitterness. She didn't dwell on Julian's betrayal, choosing instead to focus on healing and hope. Meanwhile, the criminal proceedings against Julian dragged on, mired in the complexities of international finance and corporate subterfuge. He now lived in a modest apartment on the outskirts of Los Angeles, far removed from the opulence of his former penthouse life. Julian's days were filled with legal consultations and court hearings, each one a brutal reminder of how far he had fallen. One cool autumn morning, Julian received a summons to appear in family court. The subject: visitation rights and child support adjustments. Nervous and uncertain, he arrived early, wearing a suit that fit just a bit too snugly, his hair now flecked with gray, his eyes lined with exhaustion. Victoria entered moments later, flanked by Monica Reyes and holding baby Alexander in her arms. There was no smugness in her demeanor, only quiet strength. Julian's breath caught the moment he saw his son for the first time. Alexander was 6 months old, his bright blue eyes roaming the courtroom with innocent curiosity. A surge of remorse hit Julian, sharp and sudden, almost enough to break him on the spot. The hearing was brief. The judge granted Julian supervised visitation, contingent on his cooperation with financial obligations and legal compliance. As Victoria gathered her things to leave, Julian softly called her name. She turned. "I'd like to see him," he said, voice cracking. "Just for a moment." Victoria studied him. Then, with the social worker present, she stepped forward and carefully placed Alexander in Julian's arms. The baby looked up at him, unblinking and wide-eyed. "I'm sorry," Julian whispered, just loud enough for Victoria and their son to hear. "For everything." Her expression was solemn, but not cruel. "Julian, this isn't about me anymore," she said quietly. "It's about him. He deserves better." Julian nodded, tears stinging the corners of his eyes. "I know. I want to do better. I'm trying." She didn't offer forgiveness, nor did she condemn him. She simply retrieved Alexander and gave Julian a quiet nod. And in that nod there was something subtle, not absolution, but an understanding. A small shared hope that, despite everything, they could co-parent with grace. Outside, Victoria left with Alexander in her arms. Julian stood in the hallway for a long while, grappling with guilt, sorrow, and a faint flicker of hope. Losing everything had been the harshest lesson of his life. But maybe it was teaching him what mattered most. In the weeks that followed, Julian's time with Alexander became the one bright light in his life. He read him children's books. He marveled at every giggle and smile. Victoria remained cordial, establishing firm boundaries. Slowly, the tension between them gave way to calm civility, bound by love for their son. No one could say what the future held. Julian still faced a trial, and prison remained a looming reality. But when he held Alexander, he believed, perhaps for the first time, that he still had something to fight for, something to redeem. And so ends the story of Julian Blackwell, a man who once stood at the summit of wealth and influence, only to fall spectacularly under the weight of his own pride. An empire built on illusion, a scandalous affair, a wife's courage, a father-in-law's tenacity. Every mask he wore was torn away. But within the ruins, a truth was revealed, that wealth without integrity becomes a prison, and redemption, while painful, is possible. So the story has come to a close. What a journey it's been. And hey, if you're still here, reading these last words with us, that says something. Something deep has touched your heart in some quiet, undeniable way. So let's pause together, just you and me, and look at this story from a place where there's no right or wrong, just truth as it is. At its core, this was never just about betrayal or scandal. It was about the masks we wear, the things we chase, and the wake-up calls life hands us when we forget what truly matters. Julian Blackwell's downfall wasn't just a headline, it was a mirror, a warning. And strangely, a kind of healing too. The Stoics had a phrase, amor fati, love your fate. Marcus Aurelius once said, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." That couldn't be truer here. Julian lost everything, but only then could he start to become someone worth being. And Victoria, she taught us that strength isn't loud or ruthless. Sometimes it's the silent, steady decision to protect your peace. This story reminds us that redemption doesn't come wrapped in grand gestures. Sometimes it's a whispered, "I'm sorry." A tear in a courtroom, a quiet moment with your child. Sometimes that's enough to begin again. So if this story stirred something in you, if it made you reflect, feel, or even heal just a little, then don't let it end here. Like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Let's build a space where stories don't just entertain, but transform us. Because in a world full of noise, it's these moments of honest reflection that matter most. Thanks for staying with us. See you in the next story.